Fenton Bailey, co-founder of World of Wonder. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. It's interesting, your background, very documentary-based. Mm-hmm. When new people come into this space, are you always watching to see what their take is, or can they manage it, or are they just a face?
There used to be very clear boundaries between TV and radio. And interestingly, I think podcasts end up being this sort of middle space where you can be filming the podcast as well as doing audio. I think this is filmed as well as being audio. And so I think those sort of hard and fast boundaries are merging. And so people end up doing more than one thing and often end up doing multiple different things. Funnily enough, we did a series, Catch and Kill, with Ronan Farrow for HBO that was based on his best-selling book about the Harvey Weinstein story, but based on the podcast he made about writing the book. And we then turned the podcast into a TV series. So, all those versions can coexist. And I think that's the sort of space we're in these days.
Very enterprising of you.
You're normally in LA, so it's great that you're here in London. You've been here for Content London. How have you found that?
Content London was interesting because I sort of have a feeling that the sort of real screen and TV conferences, industry conferences in the past have been more vital than this felt. And the question I was asked was, how do I feel about the state of unscripted? Is it really as bad as it seems? And I realized, looking around the modest audience, that maybe it is actually pretty bad because maybe, the audience has just passed it by, and that a lot of traditional media hasn't perhaps woken up to the way social media has come along, because there's no question we're all watching so much more than ever before. We just may not be watching linear TV. We may not even be watching streaming. We may be watching, YouTube videos and TikTok videos and Instagram. And I'm not saying they're good or bad, but I think that the fact of the matter is, media has changed seismically and rapidly, and is going to continue to change even more.
Well, you're a Brit in America with lots of international production, obviously, particularly Drag Race all around the world. It's hurting here in the UK with TV production at the moment, particularly in certain genres. Do you see that replicated elsewhere? Do you think it's just something that's happening here? What's your kind of global take?
It's the sort of end of times. And you had the writers' strike. You have massive layoffs at Disney, at Paramount, at all the big ones. You've got enormous consolidation, and as a result of that, redundancies. It's pretty bleak and dire, and a lot of freelancers in the States are out of work, not just on the scripted side, but the unscripted side too. Yeah.
For your organisation, kind of a mixture of things. You've obviously documentary production, Drag Race, and other entertainment shows. You've got an event coming up with RuPaul DragCon in London. Right. There's a streaming service that sits alongside this. Are you doing that because it's sort of fun? Are you doing that because it's important to diversify, because of the market's changing? Why all of those elements?
I think all of the above. I mean, honestly, we do love what we do. And I couldn't imagine doing what we do if we didn't love it. And I actually think it's very hard to do it if you don't. And there's certainly not a financial imperative to do it. If you want to make money, be a banker. I don't think that the money is in TV the way perhaps it was back in the 80s, And I think it's part of this change that we're seeing, that I believe everyone today really is a creator, is a producer, is a director, is an actor. My son, he's about to turn 18, and he wants to go to film school. When I applied to film school, I had never made a film in my life. He has to make 3 films to submit, and he showed them to me, and they're extraordinary. I mean, of course, I'm a proud dad, so I'm biased,
so
clearly, yes. But I was amazed at how they were shot, how they were edited. Just kids today really know what they're doing.
How long would a film of his be? I mean, how many minutes?
These are like 3 to 5 minute pieces. But I think to tell a story in 5 minutes is a skill set too. You know, you've got to have the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Well, we've got a new Drag Race UK winner in Kyron. I mean, the drag artists, they're sort of content creators themselves.
Absolutely. No, I think drag artists are the sort of... I look at them as pop stars of the 70s or 80s, the kind of iconic figures that I grew up looking up to, and that they're so capable in so many ways, not just fashion and a look, or singing or lip syncing or dancing or moving, but also in terms of getting their audience.
You've got your own streaming service in Wow Presents Plus. That's right, isn't it?
That's right.
And that obviously picks up a lot of shows that you're making for other people, and I suppose, is it a complex rights juggle to decide who gets to see what?
I think back to when, you know, listening to the radio, you'd wait for hours for your favorite song, or then once a week sit down to watch Top of the Pops. You know, what's changed is now you can have an iPod or you can have Spotify, and anything you want you can have whenever you want, which sounds great and amazing, but actually sometimes not having the choice was really good. And you are now free, Maggie, to seek out what specially interests you. And one of the things that they've discovered in this massive consolidation exercise in the States, you know, you've got HBO, CNN, Discovery, they're all in this massive company. They had the whole argument was, well, we will now have a lake of content of makeover programming, HGTV, homes, deck gardening. No one wants to watch it. Yes.
Yeah.
No one wants to. And everyone's like, they kind of have undermined the HBO brand and sort of sidelined it. It's kind of like diminished it. Yet that was what people loved, that premium feel. And you've got Max, and no one really... What is Max? It just feels like a little bit of everything. And in a way, the fact that it is so massive and has so much, it's slightly off-putting. Whereas something like, I don't know, Mubi, suddenly, which is like, oh yes, I feel like I'm Mubi. It's a curated, essentially art house movies. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go to Mubi. We always seem to think, oh, well, the new thing is here. Everything's going to be streaming. It's about massive streamers. It's actually not. Linear is enjoying a sort of moment of revival and fast channels. And I think we're ultimately emerging into a world which may sound unpleasant to some, but in which it's all these different kind of models have a role to play. And in fact, each one modifies the other one. It's not like they're out to put each other out of business.
I was looking at some of the content on WoW, and obviously there's some sort of tentpole content. There's all the kind of spin-off shows and things that talk about the shows, and things that are probably not quite podcasty, but they take a sort of a podcast feeling. I mean, how do you schedule that or kind of commission for that? Is it weird to go from someone that pitches to the networks now like, hey, what should we pay for our own service, for our own users?
Well, not really, because I think the movement we've seen over the last, I'd say, a couple of years is a reluctance on the part of commissioners to commission stuff. And they're terrified of picking the wrong thing, putting the money into the wrong thing, losing their jobs, understandably, especially when there's less money to go around and there's ratings are dwindling. So I think what's evolving is much less development, much less resources for that, and much more, if you can make it somehow, some way, that's the way to go forward. Do what you want to do, make what you want to make, and maybe it's right for Netflix, but maybe it's not. And if not, it's right for Wow Presents Plus.
So you've had some obviously shows on like MTV VH1 on the logo, I guess, for Drag Race. Which is Paramount. Got to try and remember all of the things. And on the other side, so on some of the home buying shows, I guess we're Bravo, which is NBC.
Right.
And so NBC Universal are probably going to spin off a lot of their cable channels.
Yes.
You've done quite well out of cable over the years. Where do you think that's going? Do you think that's going to be good news for those
spinning
services?
off cable, but those channels that they're putting in a separate company called Spinco.
At the moment, Spinco.
Yes. But they generate $7.5 billion in revenue annually. So they're not losing money. They're just not making as much money as perhaps they would like to make.
Yeah.
No, cable's going to stay around. Linear's going to stay around. On Wow Presents Plus, funnily enough, what we do is we have behind the paywall a linear feed that just shows content from the platform so that you don't have to choose. You can log in and just watch. We also have a thing where if you want to preview the channel, you can watch every single first episode of every single version of Drag Race that there is. And if that doesn't get you, I don't know what will.
If we go back to the beginning of World of Wonder, I guess that was 1991.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last century.
So, world's changed obviously dramatically from a kind of a media acquisition perspective and what's out there. When you started that up, do you feel the same way you did back then about what you make? Has that changed?
Well, yes, it has changed, and I feel the same way, but there's no question none of this would have happened without Channel 4. Like, Channel 4 was a window of opportunity, and we were just in the right place at the right time. I mean, I was, funnily enough, working on Wall Street as a videotape editor at Drexel Burnham, like cutting together videotapes about junk bonds and stuff I knew nothing about. And but Randy and I, we loved public access and the kind of crazy shows that were on Manhattan Cable. And because I was working at Drexel Burnham, and because my friend was making a documentary about Michael Milken, and because Caroline Thompson, the commission editor, was on maternity leave, and Michael Atwell was sitting in for her, I was working on this documentary about Drexel Burnham and junk bonds. And out of that, he said to me one day, "Oh, what else have you got? Any other ideas?" I mean, and we said, actually, we do have an idea. Let's take clips from these public access shows and make a kind of collage, late night, after the pub show. And that was our first series.
And obviously Evolution sort of take over TV into Adam and Joe.
Yeah.
And that was obviously a big hit for you. What was it like working with those two at the beginning?
Oh, I love Adam and Joe. And because Michael Atwell said, look, Manhattan Cable's great, but we got to have some originated UK content. So why don't you bring the idea of public access to the UK, which was take over TV? And I was in Barrack Street, I was cutting together the pilot reel, and oh God, some of this stuff's so tedious. And I had a pile of tapes that a researcher had looked at and said these were all rejects. And it was like 2 a.m. The tape was due. I was like, I got to do something. Picked the top tape off. It said, "Much too clever for its own good." I popped it in, and it was Adam Buxton. And I was like, oh my gosh. It was just, it wasn't me. I was just like, he's brilliant and funny. And that's how that...
Well, I think you said at Content London this week, all the biggest shows are accidental.
Yes, that's true.
We were talking about documentaries and things you're thinking about or working on. With obviously all the things we've been seeing in the news about what's happening in the church, is there some stories there that should be covered?
Well, absolutely. I mean, thanks to Channel 4 again, we made The Eyes of Tammy Faye. They didn't fully fund it. They put some money into it, and the movie version of that documentary went on to win 2 Oscars. So, thanks to Channel 4. But there's one story actually in particular I've been following prior to the Archbishop of Canterbury's resignation, which is John Smythe. I read this book a few years ago called Bleeding for Jesus, and my jaw hit the floor. The story of John Smythe and his decades-long spree of unbridled sadism and its cover-up is extraordinary. And it's funnily enough, because I'm quite old, it's a world I know because I was at boarding school in the 70s. I had friends who were at Winchester who knew John Smythe, who went to lunch at his house, who looked at the garden shed, but who didn't, who weren't abused by him.
Were they beaten at school?
No, but we were sort of part of the, I was part of at boarding school, I was in the sort of evangelical thing because you were away from home, you were sort of, you were lonely, and these were sort of slightly Spartan atmospheres. And so the evangelical thing, the prayer groups and the holding hands, it offered some kind of companionship. But I personally was never invited to UN camps, and having read Andrew Grayston's wonderful book, Bleeding for Jesus, I understand why. They had a phrase, "not quite what we want." And I was obviously, gay as they come. And I don't think I was quite what they wanted.
So
like yes, exactly.
Are you keen to turn into a doc, or is that in development?
I would love to do it I think it's an extraordinary story. I think it's a very dramatic story, but I also think it's a story about social history. You know, John Smythe made a name going after gay news as Mary Whitehouse's barrister when she sued it for blasphemy, successfully sued it for that poem of the centurion looking up at Jesus on the cross and having this fantasy. And the sort of consummate irony of that poem is that John Smythe, who condemned it and who saw the demise of gay news and won the conviction, that poem perfectly describes him. And it's just so ironic that this twisted, sick individual would be able to so hypocritically persecute gay people who just wanted to express themselves and live their lives out loud, as it were, while he perpetrated this awful, damaging, I don't even know how to finish that. He just committed so much harm in kind of hiding in plain sight. And when he was found out...
Yeah, very much in plain sight.
Yeah, and when he was found out, no consequences. Just well, let's get him off to Africa, which is also another appalling kind of idea, where, of course, he just set up and started doing the whole thing.
His own,
very worthy of more coverage. So let's see what happens next.